It was Thanksgiving evening, the kind of warm November night where the house smells like cinnamon and roasted sweet potatoes, and the laughter of grandchildren echoes from the living room. And Diane Morrison, 56 years old, a recently retired elementary school teacher from a quiet suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio, was carrying a casserole dish from the kitchen to the dining room table when her legs simply gave out beneath her. There was no clutching of the chest, no dramatic cry for help, no shooting pain down her left arm, the kind of scene we have all been taught to recognize from movies and television. Instead, Diane felt an overwhelming wave of exhaustion wash over her body, as though every ounce of energy had been drained from her muscles in a single breath, and then she was on the floor. The ceramic dish shattered beside her, her daughter screaming her name from across the room. When the paramedics arrived and rushed Diane to the emergency room, the electrocardiogram revealed something that stunned even the attending cardiologist. There on the readout, etched into the electrical signature of Diane's heart, was unmistakable evidence of myocardial scarring, the telltale footprint of not one but two previous heart attacks that Diane had never known she experienced. Two silent heart attacks that had damaged her heart muscle without ever announcing themselves with a single moment of chest pain. And as I stood reviewing Diane's case weeks later, turning over the details of her medical history, her blood work, the slow and devastating timeline of what had happened inside her body over the previous 18 months, one pattern emerged with chilling clarity. A pattern I have seen repeated dozens of times in my practice. A pattern that connects so many women over 50 who find themselves blindsided by cardiac events they never saw coming. It was not a food that caused this. It was not a supplement she forgot to take or an exercise she failed to perform. The dangerous habit that had led Diane to the edge of catastrophe was something far more subtle, far more insidious, and far more common than most women realize. And if you are a woman navigating menopause or perimenopause right now, there is a very real possibility that you are doing it too, perhaps at this very moment, without the slightest awareness that it is quietly putting your heart in danger. Let me explain what I mean, because the science behind this is both fascinating and deeply unsettling, and it begins with something your body used to do for you automatically that it has now, without warning, stopped doing altogether. For most of your adult life, from the time you entered puberty until the years surrounding menopause, your ovaries produced a steady supply of estrogen, specifically estradiol, the most potent and biologically active form of this remarkable hormone. And while most women associate estrogen with reproduction, with menstrual cycles and fertility and the changes of adolescence, what very few women understand is that estrogen was simultaneously functioning as one of the most powerful cardiovascular protective agents in your entire body. Every single day, estradiol was performing a series of critical functions that kept your heart and blood vessels in extraordinary condition. It stimulated the production of nitric oxide in the endothelial cells that line the interior walls of your arteries, and nitric oxide is the molecule responsible for telling those arterial walls to relax and dilate, allowing blood to flow smoothly and freely with minimal resistance. Without adequate nitric oxide, arteries become stiff, constricted, resistant to blood flow, and the heart must pump harder and harder to push blood through increasingly rigid channels. But estrogen was doing even more than that. Inside your liver, estradiol was actively upregulating the expression of LDL receptors, the specialized protein structures on the surface of liver cells that reach out and grab low-density lipoprotein cholesterol particles from the bloodstream, pulling them out of circulation so they can be broken down and recycled. The more LDL receptors your liver expresses, the more efficiently it clears dangerous cholesterol from your blood. This is the reason that for most of their premenopausal lives, women enjoy significantly lower rates of cardiovascular disease compared to men of the same age. Estrogen was acting as an invisible shield, a biochemical guardian that kept arteries flexible, cholesterol manageable, inflammatory markers suppressed, and the cardiovascular system operating at its healthiest. And then menopause arrives, and that shield disappears. Not gradually, not gently, but with a swiftness that catches the entire cardiovascular system off guard. In the span of just a few years surrounding the final menstrual period, estradiol levels can plummet by as much as 80 to 90%, and the consequences cascade through every system that depended on its protection. Without estrogen stimulating nitric oxide production, arterial walls begin to stiffen. The smooth, elastic tissue that once expanded and contracted with each heartbeat starts to become rigid, like a garden hose left out in the winter cold, losing its flexibility and becoming brittle. Without estrogen upregulating those LDL receptors in the liver, cholesterol clearance slows dramatically, and LDL levels can surge by 10 to 15% within just the first 2 years after the final period, sometimes rising even higher in women who carry additional metabolic risk factors. And without estrogen's anti-inflammatory influence, markers like C-reactive protein and interleukin-6 begin to climb, creating a state of chronic low-grade inflammation within the arterial walls themselves, the very environment in which atherosclerotic plaques begin to form and grow. This is the metabolic reality of what happens inside the cardiovascular system during menopause, and it is happening to millions of women right now, most of whom have absolutely no idea that their risk profile has fundamentally shifted. If you are finding this information eye-opening and want to understand the specific strategies that can help protect your cardiovascular system during this critical transition, I have put together a comprehensive resource that you will find linked in the description below this video. It goes much deeper into what I am sharing with you today, and I believe it could be genuinely valuable for you. Now, here is where Diane's story becomes truly important, because what happened to her heart was not simply the result of declining estrogen. It was the result of what she did, or more precisely, what she failed to do, in response to the warning signs her body was sending her. And this is the habit I need you to understand, the one that I see destroying women's health with alarming frequency, the one that is so deeply woven into the experience of menopause that most women do not even recognize it as a habit at all. The habit is this: the reflexive, automatic, deeply ingrained tendency to dismiss every new symptom, every unfamiliar sensation, every troubling change in how your body feels, as simply being part of menopause, as something you are expected to endure, as nothing worth investigating further, because after all, you are going through the change, and isn't everything supposed to feel different and difficult and strange right now? Diane told me that for 18 months before her collapse, she had been experiencing symptoms that, in retrospect, were her heart crying out for attention. She had noticed a persistent low-grade fatigue that went far beyond the tiredness she associated with disrupted sleep from night sweats. This was a bone-deep exhaustion that made climbing a single flight of stairs feel like scaling a mountainside, that left her winded after walking from her car to the grocery store entrance, that made her want to sit down and rest after the simplest physical tasks. She noticed an intermittent soreness in her jaw, a tightness that would appear without warning and linger for hours, sometimes radiating into her neck and the space between her shoulder blades. She experienced episodes of nausea that seemed to come from nowhere, waves of queasiness that had no connection to anything she had eaten. And what did Diane do with each of these symptoms? She folded them neatly into the narrative of menopause. The fatigue was because her sleep was disrupted by hot flashes. The jaw pain was from clenching her teeth during stressful nights. The nausea was just her hormones being unpredictable. She stopped her morning walks because she was too tired. She spent more and more hours on the couch, her body becoming increasingly sedentary as the fatigue deepened, which in turn accelerated the very cardiovascular decline that was causing the fatigue in the first place. A vicious, devastating cycle that she could not see because she had already decided that everything she was feeling had a single, benign explanation. What Diane did not know, what so many women do not know, is that a heart attack in a woman's body often looks nothing like the dramatic scene we have been conditioned to expect. The classic Hollywood heart attack, the sudden crushing chest pain, the gripping of the left arm, the gasping collapse. That presentation is far more typical of how heart attacks manifest in men. In women, cardiac events frequently arrive wearing entirely different disguises, and the reason for this lies in the complex neurobiology of how pain signals travel from the heart to the brain. The heart is innervated by visceral afferent nerve fibers that travel through the thoracic sympathetic ganglia and enter the spinal cord at multiple levels, sharing pathways with nerves that serve the jaw, the neck, the upper back, the shoulders, and the upper abdomen. In women, these shared neural pathways create what specialists call referred pain patterns that can make a heart in distress feel like a toothache, like indigestion, like tension in the shoulders, like an inexplicable wave of nausea, like nothing more than profound, overwhelming tiredness. This is why the statistics around silent heart attacks in women are so staggering. Research has consistently shown that up to 45% of all heart attacks are clinically silent, meaning they damage the heart muscle without producing symptoms severe enough to drive the person to seek emergency care. And women are disproportionately represented in this category. Women are more likely than men to experience what cardiologists call atypical presentations: the jaw pain instead of chest pain, the nausea instead of arm numbness, the crushing fatigue instead of the dramatic collapse. And when these atypical symptoms occur in the context of menopause, when a woman is already experiencing hot flashes and mood changes and sleep disruption and joint pain and dozens of other legitimate hormonal shifts, the cardiac warning signs become virtually invisible, camouflaged perfectly within the chaos of menopausal symptoms that she has already accepted as her new normal. This brings me to Margaret Chen, a 61-year-old woman who owned a small accounting firm in Portland, Oregon, a self-described tough woman who prided herself on never missing a day of work, on powering through discomfort, on being the last person in any room to complain about how she felt. Margaret had been experiencing waves of nausea and a persistent tightness across her upper back for approximately 6 weeks when she finally, reluctantly, attended a routine checkup with a new primary care physician. Not because of her symptoms, which she had categorized firmly as stress, and what she called her menopause stomach, but because her insurance required an annual physical. Her new physician, a woman who specialized in midlife health and who had seen this pattern before, insisted on running a baseline electrocardiogram even though Margaret protested that she felt fine, that there was nothing wrong with her heart, that she was just dealing with the usual menopause nonsense. The EKG told a different story entirely. The tracings revealed evidence of a previous myocardial infarction, a silent heart attack that had occurred at some point during those preceding weeks, damaging a portion of her heart muscle without ever producing a single moment of recognizable chest pain. The subsequent coronary angiography, the imaging study where contrast dye is threaded through the coronary arteries to visualize blood flow, revealed a finding that made Margaret's physician sit down beside her and take her hand before delivering the news. There was a 70% blockage in her left anterior descending artery, the vessel that cardiologists have grimly nicknamed the Widowmaker because of the catastrophic consequences when it becomes fully occluded. Margaret's arterial stiffness was significantly elevated, her C-reactive protein levels were more than 3 times the normal range, and her LDL cholesterol had risen to well over 170 milligrams per deciliter, a level that would have alarmed any clinician but had gone undetected because Margaret, like so many women her age, had stopped paying attention to her cardiovascular markers once menopause became the dominant narrative of her health. Margaret received a stent to open the blocked artery, and in the weeks that followed, as the reality of how close she had come to a fatal cardiac event settled into her consciousness, she told me something that I have never forgotten. She said, "I spent my whole life being strong, being the woman who does not complain, being the woman who pushes through, and I nearly died because of it. I nearly died because I thought that feeling terrible was just what being 61 was supposed to feel like." That sentence has stayed with me because it captures the essence of what makes this habit so uniquely dangerous for women in menopause. It is not ignorance, These are intelligent, capable, accomplished women. It is the deeply cultural, deeply conditioned belief that a woman's discomfort is not important enough to investigate, that suffering is simply part of the female experience, and that menopause gives permission to stop listening to your body because everything it is telling you can be filed under hormones and dismissed. The truth that I need every woman watching this to carry with her is that menopause is not a diagnosis that explains everything. It is a hormonal transition that changes your risk profile in profound and measurable ways, and it demands more attention to your body's signals, not less. When estrogen withdraws its cardiovascular protection, you are entering a period of genuine vulnerability, a window of time when the atherosclerotic processes that were being held in check for decades can accelerate with remarkable speed. The arterial stiffness increases, the cholesterol rises, the inflammatory environment within your blood vessels intensifies, and your heart, which has been working faithfully for more than 50 years, is now operating in conditions that are fundamentally more challenging than anything it has faced before. In this context, every new symptom deserves consideration, not dismissal. Unexplained fatigue that does not improve with rest deserves investigation. Jaw pain or neck discomfort that appears without clear dental or musculoskeletal cause deserves attention. Episodes of nausea or breathlessness during mild exertion deserve a conversation with a specialist who understands how cardiac symptoms present differently in women's bodies, and the sedentary drift that so often accompanies menopausal fatigue. The gradual reduction in daily movement that happens when a woman is too exhausted to maintain the activities she once enjoyed. This drift is not a harmless accommodation. It is a direct accelerant of cardiovascular decline. Skeletal muscle contraction during movement triggers the release of myokines, signaling molecules that reduce systemic inflammation and improve endothelial function. When movement decreases, these protective signals diminish, and the cardiovascular system loses one of its most important allies at precisely the moment when it needs the most support. Diane's abandoned morning walks were not a small thing. They were the removal of a critical layer of cardiovascular defense during the most vulnerable period of her life. I share these stories and this science not to frighten you, but to empower you. Because the single most transformative thing a woman can do during menopause is to break the habit of dismissal, to refuse the narrative that everything difficult must be hormonal and therefore unavoidable, to insist on the kind of thorough cardiovascular evaluation that she deserves simply by virtue of having a heart that has carried her through 50 or 60 or 70 years of living. Diane is walking again. Not just morning walks, but daily cardiac rehabilitation sessions that have strengthened her heart and restored much of the function she lost during those 18 months of silent damage. Her LDL has come down from 189 to 112 with a combination of targeted intervention and the dietary changes she wished someone had told her about years ago. Margaret has become something of a quiet crusader in her Portland community, hosting informal gatherings for women over 50 where she shares her story, where she looks each woman in the eye and says, "Do not do what I did. Do not assume that your discomfort is meaningless. Do not let anyone, including yourself, tell you that this is just menopause and there is nothing to be done." The habit of dismissal thrives in silence, in isolation, in the private moments when a woman feels something wrong in her body and talks herself out of taking it seriously. It thrives when women do not talk to each other about what they are experiencing, when the conversation about menopause stays focused on hot flashes and mood swings and weight gain, while the far more dangerous cardiovascular transformation happening beneath the surface goes unmentioned and unexamined. Every woman who learns that her heart is no longer protected the way it once was, every woman who understands that a heart attack might feel like jaw pain or nausea or simply an overwhelming need to sit down, every woman who decides that her symptoms matter enough to investigate, that woman has broken the most dangerous habit of menopause, and she may have saved her own life in the process. If this video has opened your eyes today, if you are thinking about someone you love, a mother, a sister, a friend, a colleague, who might be doing exactly what Diane and Margaret did, dismissing symptoms that deserve attention. I am asking you to share this with her because sometimes the most important thing we can do for each other is to say, please listen to your body and please subscribe to this channel so that we can continue this conversation together, so that no woman has to navigate these years without the knowledge she needs to protect the heart that has carried her through everything. Diane told me recently that she no longer feels guilty about what happened. She said, "I did not know what I did not know, but now I do, and that changes everything." I carry those words with me into every conversation I have with women in this stage of life because they contain a truth that is both simple and revolutionary. That knowledge, once received, transforms not just how we understand our bodies, but how we choose to care for them. Your heart has been working for you every single second of your life. It deserves a woman who listens back,